Now we're at the next stage, more exciting stage, where we really understand what causes aging. As we're getting a hold of that, I would say that in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to start to see very healthy 90-year-olds. Maybe we can extend the length of life. Everybody says, in the Bible, you can live to 120. That's it. But who knows?
So what is NAD and what is its role in cellular energy and repair?
Well, NAD is the key regulator. It's really the orchestrator or the maestro of the entire metabolic machinery of the body. So it's absolutely at the center of things and therefore critical for understanding health and disease.
So in terms of our longevity, why is it important? And talk about the connection between NAD levels and aging.
Well, because NAD is so central to all of our metabolism, to our thinking, to our bodily functions, over time, if it declines and it's not available as it should be, as it was when we were younger, there are, of course, changes in our ability to stay alive, to stay fit, to stay active, to remain at the very top of our form. So the fall in NAD as we age is a critical determinant of aging, if not the driver of aging.
So essentially, it's the root cause. As we think about as we age, we start to deteriorate. Metabolism maybe isn't as good. Maybe we're not as strong, harder to put on lean muscle mass, maybe not as sharp as we once were. As we look for the root cause, in your view, NAD plays a critical role here.
There are probably a number of root causes, some of which we know now, some of which we'll learn about in the future. But it's fair to say at this point, it's the leading contender, if not the dominant figure in the entire aging process.
So if that's the case, okay, you've got my attention. I think all of our listeners want to, feel great as they age. They want a long health span, if you will. When does the decline start?
Well, we know in the early 20s that there starts to be a fall in the levels of NAD. By the time you're 40 or 50, it's fallen considerably. By the time you're in your 60s, you've lost 50%. You've lost half of your NAD levels.
I think that's going to scare a lot of people, including myself. What are some, in terms of assessing our levels, what's available currently to get an understanding of where our levels are at, if anything?
Actually, there are no readily available lab tests. When you go to your doctor, you can't measure NAD, unfortunately. And really what you want to look at is the NAD in the tissues. So that would require a biopsy or a special blood test. Those are not available to the public.
Understood. But I think the point is also that there are downstream effects. Once it starts to decline, you'll probably see decline in a number of metabolic health markers.
Oh, yes. I mean, it is at the root cause. So you'll see a fall in so many different systems where NAD plays a critical role. We can look at organ by organ, its effect. It's quite dramatic. Take the ovary as an example. That's one of the most important organs, of course, in the woman. And we know that at a young age, 15 years of age, 20 years of age, the NAD levels are entirely normal. By the time you are out to about 40 or 50, especially in your early 50s, you've had a dramatic fall in the ovary, in the parts of the ovary which govern the eggs coming out. So the whole process of menopause, there's an outcome that we all know about, are directly related. So although we can't measure NAD itself easily, except in a research facility, the effects of the fall in NAD are very apparent.
So you mentioned menopause and obviously perimenopause, right before menopause. It's brutal for many women. And there are many protocols. There's a lot of attention in this field right now. In your view, should NAD be one of the therapeutic interventions that women should consider who are in perimenopause and menopause to alleviate the impact?
I'm not in a position to offer medical advice from our company, so I can't do that. But I can tell you that the scientific literature unquestionably shows a direct connection between the fall in NAD and the loss of ovarian function and the onset of menopause. Without a doubt, the data are absolutely rock solid.
And so in terms of lifestyle, everyone here believes in lifestyle first. What can we do in terms of lifestyle interventions that can support NAD? And on the flip side, what lifestyle is going to trigger an NAD decline?
Well, what can we do? There are really a few things that are kind of obvious. First, diet. It's essential that we have a normal diet so that we're able to produce NAD. It's essential that we actually ingest the precursors in our diet that form NAD, like tryptophan. So broccoli, eggs, fish. There are a few well-known dietary items that, obviously should be out there. So you're getting all of the starting materials to make NAD. Exercise is equally important because as you stress muscles, as you go into a cardiovascular training program, you are stimulating the production of NAD by the muscles, by the mitochondria in the muscles. So exercise is very important. Beyond that, there's really not much you can do because the fall in NAD is triggered genetically. There are reasons NAD goes down, irrespective of whether we're eating well or exercising well.
So, in terms of food, you mentioned broccoli, eggs, and fish. I'm curious on minimum effective dose. Is it the sulforaphane in broccoli, which we're better, or with eggs, for example, is it one egg a day, or is it four eggs a day? And the same with fish. Do you have a view on fish? Should we be looking at smash? Sardines, mackerel, anchovy, salmon, or herring, or you're agnostic. So can we talk about like how do you view diet and minimum effective dose?
What we're really talking about here is tryptophan, which is an amino acid in these food items. So the more, the better. But I mean, there's a reasonable amount any person can take. And to be honest, the data show that the contribution of diet, of food, is actually quite small in the overall picture of getting the NAD levels to where they should be. So while I encourage good diet because it'll help, the effect is rather small.
Understood. And I'm assuming same goes for exercise.
Exercise is more important, but still, even those who exercise into their 70s and 80s have an associated big fall in NAD. It's going to happen. It can be mitigated by, and I would encourage everyone to go out there and exercise, even in the elderly, sure, but it's not going to stop the fall. It may dent it a little bit, but it won't stop the fall.
Understood. And in terms of what one can expect when they start supporting their NAD levels, can you walk us through some of the benefits and the contrast, what that's going to look like for someone?
We listen very carefully to our customers, and they always report back if they're interested in some of the effects they've had. And so far, I've been very gratified. I'll give you a couple just real life examples, real world examples. Had a 45-year-old woman who was a tennis player, very active, always out there on the court. And then she started to develop some arthritis. And she was taking our product. And after about 2 months, she was back on the court and able to play again when she'd been really out for about a year. Another example that we had a patient in Australia with vascular dementia, a woman who was a real crossword puzzle fanatic. And her husband found out about us and ordered the product. And she was doing like 4 crossword puzzles a day before her dementia set in. And after about 2 or 3 months, he wrote back to us and said she's back to doing 1 or 2 crossword puzzles. She'd been out, unable to really figure it out. I mean, she'd been a real loss of mental acuity. We've seen a lot of effects on skin, on beauty. There is a very important role for NAD in the elasticity of the skin and also in the formation of melanin. So people with old aging spots, brown spots, those we've seen disappear. Certainly the turgor, the tightness, the elasticity of the skin has improved, and that's a very important marker in aging. Older people have saggy skin. That's just a loss of various things that are associated with declines, we believe, in NAD. So we see it across the board in our patients. And then in the literature, there are many examples. There have been improvements in blood pressure, for example. Very important paper came out in a top tier scientific journal about people with high blood pressure who were on NMN supplements. That's a way of boosting NAD, and they saw a nice response. So it's really across the board. Aging is a major change. It's not a disease per se for a particular organ. And when you can slow down aging and reverse it or at least halt its progression, you're seeing effects across many different tissues and organs and functions. That's the nice part about this. We're really going to the root cause of the aging process.
On that note, what innovations or areas of research are you particularly excited about?
Really interested in two major things: what makes how to get NAD to go up, how to boost it with supplements. That, of course, is our initial interest. But even more importantly, we're now looking at how to stop it from being broken down.
Tell me more about how do you stop it from breaking down in the first place?
Well, with anything where you're looking for a steady state level, say you're filling up a bathtub with water. So you have two things you got to keep in mind. You got to turn on the spigot where there isn't any water going in. But more than that, you have to cover the drain. Otherwise, the water that goes in would go out. So when you look at how to fill a bathtub, you got to take both of those things into consideration. The supplements are turning on the spigot, filling up the bathtub. The drain size is even more important, especially if it's a big hole, because it turns out that NAD is broken down. There's a hole, if you will, in the bottom of the bathtub. And we now know what causes it to break down. That's actually been established in the literature.
Now is this CD38?
That is certainly the major player. CD38 is
Okay, yeah, let's go deeper there. Yeah.
Yeah, CD38 is the principal player. There's a second fiddle, if you will, as well, which we can talk about. But CD38 is the major cause of NAD breaking down.
So what is CD38 and what's its role here?
Well, it's a protein. It's a special enzyme, and it's present on most of our cells. We have a little bit of it when we're young. We need it actually to deal with infection. So you need some of it. It's a good thing. Unfortunately, when you get to be about 20, you start to see a bump and it gets more and more. By the time you're 40 or 50, it's about double. So it's an enzyme which actually breaks NAD in half. So you can imagine as it goes up over age, you're going to be breaking down more NAD.
So it's an NAD killer. You don't want it.
You don't want too much of it. You need a little bit. Everybody needs a little bit, but it's way out of control. I want to go back to the example of the ovary for a minute. I told you that the levels of NAD go down and they really get very low at menopause. Well, it turns out in the very same place within the ovary that the NAD levels are going down, the CD38 levels are going up. And in fact, if you take an animal and you remove CD38, the NAD levels in the ovary do not go down. They don't go into menopause. They can still have litters well into their ages, say, of 90, equivalency to 90 years of age in a woman. They've even taken animals that have entered menopause and brought them back out of menopause.
Whoa.
Oh, yeah. So CD38 is a driver for women's health. It's absolutely essential. If you want to understand menopause, you want to understand why the NAD levels are falling in female sexual dysfunction, all of these things around childbirth, fecundity, it's all related to NAD.
So essentially, if we're able to isolate what causes the rise in CD38, the implications are very broad across longevity, specifically menopause.
I think we know why it goes up. It's an interesting enzyme. Its expression is regulated by inflammation. So if you become inflamed, you make a lot of CD38. And as we age, we get more inflamed. Unfortunately, we have a leaky gut, gets leakier as we get older. You get inflamed everywhere. And that is probably the main contributor to CD38 going up.
And what does it do to men? Does it destroy men's testosterone?
No, it doesn't have the same effect on the testis that it does in the ovary, but it has many effects in other organs in men that are relevant. For example, in muscle mass, in muscle strength, in the ability to generate power during exercise. So an 80-year-old man who was a Heisman Trophy winner, he's not throwing the ball as far. He just can't. He doesn't. The fall in NAD means that his muscles cannot throw that ball as far as he did when he was, say, 25 years of age. Same guy, but much lower levels of NAD.
Look, I'm sold. I'm starting to feel it at age 50. I'm still in pretty good shape, but so I think there's a lot of noise as it relates to NAD. Can you talk about NAD precursors and how we should think about those and how we are better informed as consumers as we look at many of the supplements and therapies available?
It is confusing out there. There's a lot of noise and a lot of products. So let me try to simplify it, make it real simple. If you want to bump up the levels of NAD, okay, you're going to take some kind of a supplement that will get the NAD levels up in your cell. What would that be? You could take NAD, and that was what people tried at first, but it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is that NAD doesn't go into cells very easily. So if you swallow NAD, most of it will never make it into your cells. So it's not very efficient. You could try something that's right before NAD in the cascade or in the synthesis of NAD. NAD is made by a number of steps. There are about 4 steps. So you could give the material on step 3 and get it into the cell and then hope the cell would finish the process and make the NAD. And that's what NMN actually does. So it's the step right before making NAD. And that's why we've recommended it. There's actually a step right before NMN. That's called NR. That's on the market too. You'll see that in a lot of stores. So that's one step before NMN. Or you could even go the step before NR. Okay. That's nicotinamide, but that is really an inefficient way to do it The best way is to get as close as you can, which is the NMN supplement.
And so your view on NR, it's just not as efficient, if you will, because it's one step behind NMN in terms of like the hierarchy of precursors, if I'm summarizing.
I wish it were that simple. I used to think that. No, because I'll tell you why it's not so simple. NR, yes, it's a fine supplement. It's right before NMN, and you would think, well, why bother? Take NMN. Why take something earlier? It turns out that NR also blocks CD38, so it prevents the breakdown of NAD. So it's actually doing double duty. So it's not an uninteresting molecule. It's quite NR is quite interesting. I think still in the balance, NMN is better and more effective, but I wouldn't disregard NR.
Walk me through your day, your dosage, what you do.
Right. Well, we like to start the day early with Younger, which is our product. It's a capsule. We take it in the morning. We put it next to our toothbrush so we don't forget it. And it's a capsule which has 900 milligrams of NMN. Remember, NMN's right before NAD, so it's the last one. And actually, NMN has another advantage over NR that it can shoot right into the cell. There's a special shuttle, so makes it more efficient too. So we start the day with that. And in the capsule, we actually have other components. It's not just NMN. So we're different than other companies that are just selling NMN. We actually have 4 other materials in there, and they help with this process of getting NAD levels elevated. For example, we have 2 molecules which interfere with CD38, which slow it down. And so those components are very important to mix with the supplementation.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about why the 900 specifically, because I respect and appreciate the thoroughness of your research. And let's talk about the buddy ingredients, if you will.
Yeah. So what's the right amount of NMN? The right amount of NMN, of course, is the amount that will get you the highest level without causing harm. And there's been some studies actually on the safety of this. In fact, Dave Sinclair published a study where he gave 2.5 grams every day. So that's a lot more than 900 milligrams, right? That's a big, hefty dose. And actually, in that study, people seemed okay.
Like David looks like he's 30 and he's and he's like in his mid 50s. I don't know what else he's doing, but yeah.
Right. I won't ask, but seriously, the 2.5 grams was tolerated well. So I figured when I saw that, well, we have some latitude. That 900 milligrams is going to be well tolerated. And then there were a number of studies looking at that dose and doses of 1200, and they all seemed to be doing the job in terms of getting NAD levels up. So that's why we chose 900 milligrams, something in the middle, safe, well tolerated, shown to be effective in other studies.
Understood. And let's talk about the buddy ingredients.
Yeah. So again, it's important to, when you're filling the bathtub, you can turn on the spigot, that's giving the NMN, but you got to stop the drain. So we put in a couple components that do that. One of them is hydroxytyrosol, which is from olives, from olive oil. And that has an effect in interfering with the amount of CD38 available. And we also use resveratrol, which is from grapes, from red grapes and wine. And resveratrol is a wonderful blocker along with another molecule in the body, and they work together to slow down CD38. So that was the idea. Use natural ingredients that are well tolerated, that are safe, widely available. We know from experience that they're well tolerated. Mix them together with the NMN, and then you get the water in the bathtub to come out because you're closing the drain and you're turning the spigot on full blast. So you're going to get a good bump in your NAD levels.
Look, it makes a lot of sense if you're just taking NR or NMN without anything else. You're not stopping you still got a leaky bucket, so to speak. You're just saying the tub and saying the bucket. You get a leaky tub. You still have a hole in the tub. So that's great. You keep on putting water in there, but you still got a hole. You need to plug the hole and fill the tub at the same time.
Yeah, that's our thinking. Makes sense.
It does make a lot of sense. So who can benefit?
Well, anybody over the age of 20 is going to start aging. So I would start as soon as you can, because by the time you're 30, you're certainly not at the same peak performance in terms of your thinking process, your strength, your power. We talked about ovarian function. We know in a 30-year-old, very different than in a 15 or 20-year-old. May not appreciate that, but fertility evolved when people were in teenagers. So women in their 30s are very different than what nature intended, which was reproduction before the age of 20. So by the time you're 40, there's a big fall off in your ovarian function. So why would you wait? It's better to start soon and maintain good levels for all of your systems. And so we encourage people to start really as young people.
So we've talked about cognitive benefits. We've talked about skin health benefits. We've talked about strength, muscle mass benefits. What about metabolism?
NAD is the central part of the metabolic machinery of the cell. It controls how much ATP we make, which is where all our energy ultimately comes from. It's from production. So in order to think properly involves a lot of ATP. In order to run, in order to digest, in order to fight infection, all of these processes require a healthy level of ATP, and therefore NAD is absolutely central, instrumental in that.
So if someone is looking to lose fat mass, which maybe they're finding a little bit more difficult as they're accumulating years, this should be something they consider in terms of their protocol.
Yes, it will speed up oxidation of fat, depletion of fat reserves. Yes.
So who should be cautious? It feels like in my view, in the research I've done, and I follow your work, again, you're very thorough and respected in the field. There doesn't seem to be a lot of risk or downside if you're above a certain age, which is basically everybody, talking 20 years old. Are there any watch outs for people?
Well, we're not talking about boosting the NAD level above normal. We're talking about getting it back to normal. So we wouldn't expect toxicity. Toxicity occurs when you increase something in the body way over what it would normally be. And then there's a risk of danger. But here we're just talking about getting it back to where you were when you're in your 20s. So it's a very low risk. It's a natural molecule, ultimately, NAD. It's the central mediator of all of these systems. So the risk of toxicity is extremely low, and no one has really reported any clinical downside to it that we're aware of.
And also the risk decreases as you age, considering the levels are declining more, so the risk becomes lower and lower the older you get.
Right, right. Someone in their 80s has probably about a third of the NAD when they were 20. Yeah.
Jason Walkup here, founder and co-CEO of mindbodygreen and the host of the mindbodygreen podcast. Please subscribe. You'll never miss a show and you won't regret it. And so as I think about, again, like the downstream effects, because I think most people just want to feel good as they age. They want to be able to do the things they love doing. They want health span, not necessarily lifespan. What are some other benefits or maybe better, like anecdotes of people who...
Well, let me address one that's of great interest to most people. Let's talk about sexual dysfunction. Now, there's both male sexual dysfunction and female sexual dysfunction. And we know that about Viagra has been a big hit. A lot of people use that. A lot of men use that. Some women are starting to use that. And this all revolves around the role of nitric oxide, which governs erection and other sexual functions. Well, it turns out that NAD is required to make nitric oxide. So I'll walk you through that because that's an important concept, I think, for your audience to understand that sexual dysfunction and NAD are connected. In order to have sexual function, you need nitric oxide. It's a gas. It's made by a special enzyme in the genitals called nitric oxide synthase. Nitric oxide synthase levels are pretty much stable as we get older. So that doesn't fall with age. But there's a factor that binds to the nitric oxide synthase that is used to make nitric oxide, and that is called NADPH, which is a cousin of NAD. It's a form of NAD. So if you get depletion of NAD as you get older, your NADPH levels will fall and your nitric oxide synthase doesn't work as it did when you were younger. So people in their 70s, 60s, 50s, they're going to have falling NADPH levels and declining sexual function.
Which is essentially cardiovascular disease, because nitric oxide, this has an impact in terms of blood pressure, cardiovascular health.
Also, it's a different form of nitric oxide synthase there, but yes, the blood vessels are lined with nitric oxide synthase. It produces nitric oxide and it dilates the blood vessels. And if you don't have nitric oxide, you get high blood pressure. So as you age and your NAD levels go down, your NADPH levels are not there, and you get high blood pressure. It's very common to see high blood pressure in 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds. It's almost, half the population. So NMN supplementation has been tested in these patients, in humans, and it drops their blood pressure down. It's a treatment for hypertension.
What, on a percentage basis, do you recall what it is?
It was a paper in Nature. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was very significant. I mean, this was not like 1 or 2 points. This was a big improvement in blood pressure.
That alone is tremendous because high blood pressure, once like it is so it goes undetected and most people take it wrong. That's another story, but it is a silent killer, and again has downstream effects. And sexual dysfunction is often a telltale sign that cardiovascularly you're going to have some issues.
Yeah. I mean, people take Viagra, and what that does is to stop the breakdown of the nitric oxide effects. And that's important. But if you don't have nitric oxide around, Viagra will not work. So for patients who don't respond to Viagra or Cialis, one of the other PD5 inhibitors, they should think about this because ultimately the consumption of NMN or anything that boosts your NAD levels will have a real positive effect on NADPH and NO production. So it's something more and more people will pay attention to in this field of sexual dysfunction.
Well, also too, the PD5 inhibitors, I think that's the correct catch-all, come with a whole host. Yeah, they come with a whole host of side effects.
Oh, yes, you can get dizzy, you can get woozy, you can have changes in your color of your vision. Yeah, they don't come and they need to be taken at an inopportune time, perhaps in terms of sexual function. And, I'm talking here about most people probably think I'm talking about men, but female sexual dysfunction is equally dependent on nitric oxide, the enlargement of the labia, the lubrication of the vagina. We were the first to publish on that. Showing the role of nitric oxide in vaginal lubrication. The clitoral enlargement is completely dependent on nitric oxide. Orgasm, all of these things revolve around NO, nitric oxide. And without NAD there in sufficient quantity, the nitric oxide will be low as well. Now, you can take, as a woman, you could take Viagra or Cialis and overcome some of these benefits, but not all of them. So, really getting the NAD levels up are critical, in my opinion, for improving and reversing the female sexual dysfunction.
Again, that's in terms of vaginal health, a lot of women struggle with that.
Well, the anterior two-thirds, the front of the vagina, the first two-thirds, is extremely dependent on nitric oxide. You have high levels there upon arousal, and it causes about a 50% increase in the length and size, and then it brings in a lot of blood flow around the first two-thirds of the vagina, and that has a big effect on sensitivity and arousal. So, in terms of sexual enjoyment, performance, response, nitric oxide in women in the first two-thirds of the vagina is important. The last third of the vagina is extremely different because there the function is on protecting the sperm so that it can get in to fertilize an egg. So that part of the vagina is a very different story. But the first two-thirds are involved in sexual function, enjoyment. And for there, the NO levels are absolutely critical.
As I think about nitric oxide, there are so many beets you can eat in a day to in terms of food's only gonna get you so far.
Right. Well, and even so, without NADPH, you will not produce nitric oxide. It's an absolute requirement.
So I'm thinking again of the implications, and I think we're at an interesting point as it relates to healthcare, and there are a lot of very smart doctors who are looking for alternative treatments, and I think a lot of consumers would rather take a supplement than a pharmaceutical. And coming back to blood pressure, sexual health, like, are you seeing more doctors, or maybe it's your hope that more doctors, instead of going to, a blood pressure medication or Cialis or Viagra, would prescribe Wonderfeel?
No, I don't think they're really aware of the supplement industry. As a doctor myself, I can tell you that your training orients you in a certain fashion away from supplements. The pharmaceutical industry, of course, has a big role in that, but you're socialized as a young physician and then later in your career to really look away from the supplement industry. And that's where I think the nutraceutical, the supplement industry has been so important in supplementing the doctor, if you will, because the doctors really are oriented towards the pharma industry. That's the way you train, that's the way you think. And that's why I want to get the word out to let people know there are additional things we can do to maintain our health, improve our health span, hopefully improve our longevity.
Where would you like to see things go?
More research would be really helpful. We want to look at very special sets of people at different ages with different problems in their health and start to understand who's going to benefit the most. Are there different levels of NMN that we should be giving to different subpopulations? How can we block CD38 better so that the big hole in the bathtub gets smaller? What can we do? We have a very active research program to look for natural CD38 inhibitors that are stronger than the ones we're using. Very important to discover those so that we have a better combination, stronger potency. Maybe longer acting release would be nice so people don't have to take it once a day. There's a lot we can do to improve our products, and we will pursue that.
So in terms of natural inhibitors, it sounds like it's early. Is there anything on your radar that you think is potentially promising, but maybe too early to say definitively?
We're still in the lab right now, but we have a very active program where we're taking natural products and making slight modifications to them chemically to try to improve the impact on blocking CD38. There are also, by the way, other things besides CD38. I don't want to leave the impression it's the only consumer or eater of NAD. There's also PARP, which is very important.
What's part?
It's a nuclear enzyme that uses NAD, so it consumes it, normally not too much, but there are certain conditions and diseases and states where it can really get active and chomp away at NAD, lower levels.
And what drives PARP and what are some of those diseases?
Well, PARP is activated in two ways. One, by inflammation. We already talked about how as you get older, you get more inflamed. So everybody, as they're getting older, is getting more PARP activation from that. And then acutely, PARP is activated by damage to our DNA. That's its main job. Its day job is fixing broken DNA. So as you get older and your DNA starts to get hits and damage, PARP gets activated and uses up NAD.
So how far away do you think we are from essentially neutralizing aging?
I think it's multifactorial. So I don't think there's just a switch, like you go to your living room and there's a switch which turns the lights on and off. I don't think it's that simple. Okay. So there are a lot of different switches. CD38 is certainly one of the big switches. And then there are other causes too, which are minor but still play a role. For example, there are three different ways that NAD is synthesized in the body. And we know that the enzymes that make NAD start to go down with aging as well. So there's another problem. So it's not just one thing. But if we can, with better research and better understanding, as we're seeing right now, I think within 10 to 15 years, there will be a real major leap forward in how we think about the aging process. You know, when I was born, the average length, I mean, males at the turn of the 1900s, men died at 49 on average. Think about that. That was the average length of life of a man, 49 years of age. When I was born in the 50s, you know, it was up in the 60s. There were people, of course, always who have been 80 and 90, but very few. Today, we see people on the street all the time who are 80 and 90. So there's already been a change in my lifetime in how people look and feel and what they do. But I think that we're just at the beginning because this was based on better health care, better nutrition, more sports, things that we can do. Now we're at the next stage, more exciting stage, where we really understand what causes aging, what causes cells to senesce, to die as we get older. As we're getting a hold of that, I would say that in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to start to see very healthy 90-year-olds. Maybe we can extend the length of life. Everybody says, you know, in the Bible, you live to 100, you can live to 120. That's it. But who knows? You know, if we understand these mechanisms, we can not only have better lives, but longer lives. And when I say better lives, so many of the diseases that are out there, we don't call them aging diseases, but they're really all related to aging. You know, what is diabetes or arthritis or heart disease or hypercholesterolemia? Are they just out of the blue? Did they just happen randomly? No, they're connected to getting older. So if you can slow that down, you can slow the appearance of those diseases and make a big difference.
Yeah, I agree. I was anecdotally talking with some friends this weekend, and I said, you know what? I think if we can just hang on for like the next 10 years and avoid major disease or getting hit by a bus, I think we're going to get to a place in the next 10 years where we're going to look at a much more extended health span, to your point, whether that's 100 or 110. We just got to hang on. Like, let's just really push through that. Let's get through the next 10 and we're going to be good.
I'm optimistic too. That's right. Yeah.
So you mentioned research. If you could wave your magic wand and have unlimited resources for any study, what would you do?
I would come up with a really fantastic CD38 inhibitor. I think it would change our lives. It would be the kind of transformational change like having the car, the internal, I mean, the internet. I mean, having a CD38 inhibitor would have as much effect as the internet, as much impact. It will change us.
Wow. Any hunches?
We're working on it. That's what I do when I get up in the morning.
Well, I love your work. I love your product. Is there anything we didn't cover that you would like to touch on before we wrap?
Well, just name of our company is Wonderfeel because we want people to feel wonderful. And you can certainly go on the website and learn a lot about what we do at wonderfeel.com. We like to have a good communication out there with our public, with the customers, through podcasts, through stuff on the website. Stay informed. We're doing a lot of research. We're going to have new products coming out soon. I can say that. And give it a try. If you're thinking about it, try it. Be your own judge. See for yourself. Everyone's special and different. Everyone has special needs in some way. And so you have to try it out and see, but it's been very safe. So I'm not asking people to take a risk, but it's worth a try right now.
Well, I'm a big fan. I appreciate your thoroughness and research, and very exciting to see what the future holds. Andrew, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to be here. Good to talk to you.